everybody. Hi, Belle.
Hi, Jonathan. How are you?
I've got COVID, but otherwise I'm okay.
Oh, I hope you feel better soon.
Yeah, it's affecting me the way that the vaccines affected me, which were like I had body aches, a really foggy brain, and I kept wanting to fall asleep.
Same. I had COVID-like symptoms for all of my vaccinations as well. And I was just like, oh, but
Right. But what are you gonna do?
Exactly.
I got a very mild case, so I can't really complain too much.
I'm glad to hear.
I'm definitely stuffed up. The aches and pains are not as bad. Making sure to drink my wellness tea.
Oh yeah, and in the sun card, good health, good juju, happy vibes all around.
Yeah, and it's a matcha green tea, but it's got like echinacea and elderberry and other good stuff. So yeah.
Awesome.
So we are here to do a Q&A for Spirit Keepers.
Sure.
I never saw any questions from the in-depth videos I did, but there was a lot to digest.
Oh.
Right?
Yeah.
So I guess a good question to start with is, did you choose the cultures based on the cards, or was that kind of like a random matchup?
It was half rational, half intuitive. I just kind of I took it one step at a time. So sometimes you begin with a vision and then you start to kind of look and figure out where that vision's coming from. You search the history, different cultures, and then it becomes half rational based, half intuitive. A lot of times, when I say it's visionary, people always get a little antsy when you get too woo-woo about it, right? If you say, oh, I astral traveled. But it's more research centric as well, because I felt like whatever I envisioned needed to have a factual basis. So I did stick very closely to academic journals, university press published, own voices, authored books on these cultures.
Again, an aloha to everybody. Ginger Faye is here. Aloha, Ginger. And Jamie of Wandering Mountain Bardic Path. Hello. And Clementa's Creative Cartomancy. Hello. I don't think I've seen your name here before. Welcome. Oh, and there's my mom texting. she's a little, she's being worried about her son that has COVID. So
yeah.
And I am feeling a little feverish. So.
Oh no.
It started last night. I took my temperature this morning. It was like 99.1. I took my temperature right before we went live, and it was like 98.5. It's fluctuating. So, aloha, Aquarius, Al, Debbie, and Gerald of Tarot Stash. Oh, Clementa says that they've lurked but not made alive. Welcome.
Hi, we're in the same boat. I lurk all the time, and I haven't made alive yet. So, together, Clemencia.
I love it. When reading with the deck, I know that each card has got so many layers. How many layers do you actually read with? Or do you read differently with your own deck versus other decks?
So I always make the analogy to the engine of a car. I don't think you really need to know the intricacies of engineering to drive your car from point A to point B. And so I do hope people will approach the tarot deck I say superficial, but not in a negative tone. Do you know what I mean? Like in just a very normal, mundane type of way. And so when I'm reading about like what to have for dinner, that's how I read my SKT deck. And then other times I do deep dive into the many layers of culture. So I always see every card has a minimum of 3 layers because I thought of working it in that trinity, right? So you have the upper layer, the mundane layer, and the underworld lower layer. So every single card has at least 3 layers of meaning. Every single symbol has a minimum of 3 layers of meaning or 3 layers of intentions. And so because, I created the deck, yes, sometimes I do deep dive and also I pick and choose. So for example, if you're doing a type of reading that is more aligned with a form of underworld journeying or shadow work or deep diving of any sort of energetic, resonance, then I'll look at that underworld layer that I embedded into the card. If I'm just kind of reading about what's going to happen next week, then I read on that, mundane level. And then if I'm trying to connect with the holy guardian angel, whatever concept you have in your mind of what I would equate to the holy guardian angel or the celestial realms or gods and goddesses, goddess work, then I will read on that upper level.
Okay. Yeah, that definitely makes your deck unique that way. How important is it working with the journal to really get the deck?
I think with every single deck, I think in terms of any study, any form of any kind of study that you would do, any tarot deck that kind of deviates from a standardized RWS or standard Marseille, you would want to have a journal dedicated to that study. Just, it's not like it's required. It's more like it really helps you organize what you're learning. It helps with memory retention. I think when I just read something and I don't take notes or I don't organize it in some written way, it goes in one year out the other. Like I can't retain the information, in which case I've wasted my time. So it's not like I'm saying you're required to keep a journal. It's just like, why would you go through the effort and not keep a journal so that you can retain all of that information? And so to encourage people to do that so you don't waste your time and you do retain as much as possible, that's the reason I provided the journal.
Okay. And it's not necessarily needed if someone has another journal that they're using per se.
Yeah, absolutely.
I will say there's a lot of information packed in this little journal here.
I'm glad.
Yeah, and there's definitely some things on the journal that you will not find either in the little white book or the book of maps. So in that sense, it's very important to have the full system, right?
Yeah, I hope so.
How important are the weekly rituals for you?
I do daily, so it depends. I think the weekly rituals that I wrote down as instructive are more to help you get started. If someone is starting from a blank slate, they don't even know where to begin, having something rigid like that gives you a baseline. And then once you practice it, you know what works for you, so you keep it, and you know what doesn't work for you, in which case you discard or you modify and create derivatives of. So I don't necessarily use those foundational basic forms, but I use a lot of that basics in my everyday ritual practice, in my weekly ritual practice, in the way I approach life. So I don't necessarily separate like ritual from everyday life. They're interwoven in a way that feels very seamless. Like my life, I try to lead a life that's more ritualized, and ritual has to have some kind of a mundane or practical basis to it. So they're interwoven.
Right. I love that. Oh, we have our first question from the audience here. Tony would like to know, how do you retain all this knowledge and have a day job?
Well, keeping a journal. So I have lots and lots of different journals. And one of the things that I do is if you keep a journal for everything that you're learning, every form of study, every branch. I have a journal on like real estate law. I have a journal on astrology. I have a journal on different types of tarot decks. And when you do that, you're actually training your brain. By doing that, you're teaching your brain to compartmentalize and creating an astral filing system in your mind that's the equivalent to the physical filing system of journals that you're keeping. And the more you do that, like over years and years and years of dedicated routine practice of these forms of journaling and filing systems, your brain learns to retain it. And so you actually increase your eidetic memory or your photographic memory just by doing that. I don't think it's a gift. I think it's something it's a skill that you can develop. And it's just, do you choose to develop that eidetic memory or not?
Mm-hmm. Oh, do you have any tips on people who say they're bad about journaling?
Well, what do you mean by bad about journaling? Do you mean bad about staying with it, right? Like as in,
I'm guessing that's what she means. Yeah.
You have to, in the beginning, you fake it till you make it. That's kind of, I know some people hate that advice. And even, they say it like, oh, even you fake what to wear, right? To work, you dress the part of the job title that you want. Even people, that's kind of a typical business advice. And sort of extrapolating on that, in the beginning, if you're not used to having that discipline, you do have to force it. One of the privileges I had was my parents, or my father more specifically, forced it on me as a kid. And because that discipline was forced on me when I'm very young and impressionable, when I became an adult, it became second nature for me. That's
Right.
not the parenting style that everybody gets. If you want to have that discipline, and not everybody does. So I think that we have to be very careful there, right? Some
Right.
people are going to operate better and they thrive when they're very disciplined and militaristic with their time. For other people, that's going to suffocate their creativity. So that's why self-awareness is so important. You have to know yourself first.
Right.
Are you the type that thrives with a more anarchical, creative, certainly free-flowing, creative type of energy in your life, or do you do better when it's very disciplined and militaristic? So if you want to be better about keeping a journal, first start by forcing yourself. So for example, you say every morning at 8:30 a.m. on the dot sharp, you have to sit down and you have to journal something. You can't leave your desk, can't get your butt off that seat until you've journaled for a minimum of, let's say, 10 minutes. So you're forcing yourself there at 8:30 every day for 10
Right.
minutes. But then while you're doing that, you also have to check in with yourself and ask yourself, how does this feel? Is it just, oh, I'm lazy and this is really good. It kind of feels nutritious. It kind of feels good for you. Then you know that's a good thing. But if it feels awful, like you just in the depths of your guts, you feel terrible about this feeling, you know immediately this is not right for you. So you really have to listen to your body. Your body will tell you what's right for you. So if you force yourself for a week to sit down at 8:30 every day and your body is like, no, nah, dude, this is not for me, don't do it. You got to stop. You have to listen to your body, because if you listen to your body, it will start to tell you more information. It knows that it has a voice. And if
Mm-hmm.
you sit down and it's just a matter of laziness, you know how you feel, right? Like, oh, I don't want to eat my vegetables. If it's that kind of a feeling, stick with it.
Right. I love that. And then Clementa has a follow-up question here. How important is it to review journals and how frequently?
This I'm kind of bad at myself too. I think it's very important to review your journals, because that's feedback. I think no matter what you're doing, you need feedback to grow and to learn. Even at work, even in any kind of a hobby, the feedback is extremely important. And the way you get feedback in independent study is reviewing what you did in the past, your past work. So it's very important. I'm not great at it, but what I find that whenever I do sit down, maybe once a month or once every 3 months, I sit down and I read through what I just wrote. That experience it's so positive, and it's really cool to see how things, like, for example, something that made no sense a year ago that I'm like, oh, that's BS. That doesn't even make any sense. Just 1 year later, it makes perfect sense. And in that moment, I learned so much about symbolism, about how my brain works, about how my psychic ability works. So it's extremely important to sit down to do that. If you didn't do it, force yourself to do it and review something you wrote a year ago. And you'll be so shocked at like what comes through, even readings. So for example, if you get a tarot reading from somebody, if you get a psychic reading from somebody and it's written down or you took notes, after a year, or if something that you did a couple years ago that you received, open it up and reread it now and see what happens. I think that type of feedback is imperative for growth.
Yes, definitely. Gerald says, I agree. Journaling is a great way to collect what captures my attention. And a great way to become aware of what your body is telling you is to journal.
Yeah, absolutely. Because it's almost a form of it's half rational thinking, half automatic writing, where you allow your body to kind of have a voice and speak through your hand. So it's not always just the conscious mind talking at you. Sometimes you need to have, like, I think that also helps if you conceptualize yourself as having many different voices. And if you think of yourself as the diversity of voices, you actually allow different parts of your own opinions to come through.
Yes.
So I think this is a very interesting way to conceptualize your inner self.
Well, and it fits with my training as an acupuncturist, because each organ has its own spirit, and right. So, and I had a thought, but it escaped me. It'll come back to me, hopefully. One of the things that I noticed, as far as acupuncture goes, is that there's oftentimes I get someone like on my table who's there just to like fix me. I'm like, well, what's wrong? My knee hurts. Well, part of your knee. I don't know. My knee hurts. I'm like, how can you not know what part of your knee is hurting? And I think that is a big a stumbling block for a lot of people, that disconnection from their own body. And until you have that like integral connection, I don't think it's very easy to either journal or do readings or any of that stuff.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely agree. And I think when people do say that, I think that tells you as an acupuncturist, the healer, anybody who's been tasked to help them, is that this person might not have a full grasp of their own body. And then that kind of extends into self-knowledge as well. So when you do have a pain and you don't know where it's coming from, not only do you need to figure that out, but then use that as a alert that there's a symptom that you don't really know yourself fully yet, which is totally okay. Nobody knows themselves fully, but it's just a sign to yourself, oh, I'm not as self-aware as I thought. I need to know myself better.
yeah. And I always try and encourage people to journal about what happens each day. Like, oh, my knee was hurting this time, this day. What were you doing to cause the pain? And which area of the knee is hurting?
Mhm.
Because
Absolutely.
again, it's like, how can you not know what part of your knee is hurting? Just the
Yeah.
knee.
Mhm.
That's just so mind-boggling to me. Yeah, and I understand. I mean, we have a whole new body every 7 years, so I mean,
Yeah.
part of it is tapping into the cellular memory, um, and also just being aware of that cellular memory in our own bodies.
Yeah, and tarot helps with that. I think if you use tarot or any form of divinatory tool as, a mode of self-knowledge, that keeps you self-aware. And you find that it does have that incidental positive side effect of knowing your knee better, knowing your inner self better. And so that's one of the greatest attributes, I think, to a daily tarot practice.
Definitely, definitely. Um, Let me see. Do I have any other questions? I think I got most of my questions that I really wanted to make sure we covered. So if you guys have any more questions, please toss them out. Book of Maps, quite the tome. How much of this do you expect the readers to actually have integrated before they start using the deck?
Zero. The book of maps isn't even necessary. The reason I wrote the book of maps is actually out of reverence for the cultures that I explore in the deck. I feel like you can't do the images justice unless you've given people the tools and the references so they know where the cultures come from. They know the history. They can refer to the book of maps to see the depths of every single culture and why it's in that card. So that it's not, it lets you know that nothing is arbitrary. So it isn't that I expect anybody at all to know anything in the book of maps. It's just it's a sign of reverence to the cultures that we're exploring. And I think if you want to do the cultures justice, then you would want to learn more about any card that speak or any culture that speaks to you.
Definitely. Well, and the other thing about the book of maps is that I love how you go into in detailed depth about each individual card. So we're seeing things that have been covered by other things. So there's hidden aspects of the cards that if you know that are there, kind of changes the card a little for you.
Mm-hmm.
And this is where you find those. So that for me, that's the important part. And yes, I love the in-depth expo of all the cultures and everything. And then Clementa says, I think the book of maps helps me with feelings of appropriation. Makes sense. Gerald says, I think it's a lack of language that makes it difficult for me to express what I experience when reading tarot or trying to describe where exactly does your knee hurt.
That's true too.
Mm-hmm. It's true. That's why I try and dumb it down a little bit for my patients, and I say the inner knee, the outer knee, the top of the knee, the back of the knee, to just get the general basis. I'm not gonna say how's your ACL, because most people are like, what's that? Right, I'm gonna be like, how's your inner knee? Is it hurting when you put pressure on it?
Mm-hmm.
So I mean, in a way, it's also the healer that needs to meet the person on their level as far as language goes.
That's one of the great things with working with a reader that you value and trust, a psychic, a medium, a shaman, shamanist, any of that type of worker, even as somebody who is into the occult and esoteric, is because you work with them so that the two spirits can kind of sync up, and then the two bodies of vocabulary come together. And that synced upness, I know that's I'm making up words now. I think that helps. That gives you new words. That gives you new vocabulary to express what it is that you're intuiting. And so I think it's very useful to interact and engage with other spiritual workers.
Honestly, I have a dictionary next to me when reading my book of maps. I love that I learn at different levels while going through my SKT study group.
I did love SAT. I did pretty well. I can't remember what my score was. I think it was just a couple points behind a perfect SAT verbal score. So it is just something that I'm really into.
Yeah, you love your vocabulary. There's nothing wrong with loving your vocabulary. I love a good vocabulary myself. So, but it's also good to expand your vocabulary, right? Because you're helping your brain elasticity and everything.
And also, it's not SAT vocabulary. I mean, in my own defense, I think sometimes you're trying to express something very precise. And the words that we use in everyday language doesn't have that same precision. And so if there's another word that better encapsulates what I'm trying to say, I'll go for that word. So it's not just the SAT vocab. It's because there's something precise that's being conveyed.
Right. Well, and you want to make sure that you're using the exact word that describes what you're trying to describe, which I get it. Yeah. One nerd to another.
Exactly.
Yeah, my mom and I used to do this game occasionally when I was a kid where you just flip randomly open to a random word in the dictionary. And like you'd memorize what it was and what it meant, and then you close the dictionary and then you'd ask the other person. And they'd have to come up with a definition for the word.
Yep. And then you have to use the word throughout the week to kind of retain it in your mind.
Yeah, it's fun. It's a fun little exercise. So I guess one question I have about the deck is it really meant for more in-depth work, or is it perfectly okay for people to use it just like their daily reading?
I use it for daily readings. I use it for career questions. I use it for everything, but that's more me. I think each person develops different relationships with different decks based on the aesthetics. I think aesthetics, we tend to undervalue the importance of aesthetics, which is a weird thing to say because you always hear culture saying, oh, we are too superficial as a society. We care too much about aesthetics. But I think there's something spiritual and meaningful in aesthetics, and we connect to particular styles for a reason. So, if the aesthetics of particular decks appeals to you and resonates, then that can be something to explore deeper. So I think obviously the aesthetics of the deck that I created resonates very precisely with me because I drew it. And so because of that, I can use the deck for anything and everything. But if the artwork or the style doesn't resonate with you, then it doesn't make sense for you to use it for everything because that's not the right tool for you. And that's totally okay. That's just kind of how life is. There are many decks that don't resonate with me aesthetically. And so it's kind of just find what works for you and see how that does. So for some people, the deck is only used for spiritual readings or more spiritually like purposes towards transcendentalism. Then in that case, that's because something about the art and the detailing only speaks to that purpose. For other people, they can use it for mundane readings. Really think about what works for you.
That makes perfect sense too. Gerald says, I'm happy that I look things up. Exactly, the precise language helps clarify. I'm always learning, and that keeps my mind agile. Yes, definitely.
I'm so glad.
Excuse me. Give me a moment.
No. Keep drinking. Stay hydrated. And everybody has their own advice in terms of homemade recipes or homemade remedies, right? So mine is lemon, ginger, and honey, but everybody has their own. So it's
yeah.
Which one do you use?
I'm a big fan of elderberry
Oh,
when I'm sick. Um, so my tea is actually a wellness tea. It's a matcha green tea base, but it's got elderberry, echinacea. What else is in there?
that's very French, right? I remember I got a cold in Paris and everything was elderberry. Like everyone pointed me to elderberry when I was in France. And I was like,
Mm-hmm.
wow, every culture kind of has like their own go-to home remedies. It's very
Right,
cool.
right. So sometimes I'll mix that with a little Chinese stuff. So I'll throw in some ginger in the
Yeah.
elderberry tea. And
Yeah. Ginger
really,
is my go-to for obvious reasons.
right? Ginger's good for everything.
Yeah.
Good for your
Turmeric,
stomach,
though.
good for your colds and flus, good for
Yeah.
Oh yeah. My Chinese teachers were very adamant about ginger. In fact, I one of my teachers was like 32nd degree Taoist master of his family's lineage, and he taught nutrition class, and he said the only way to drink milk properly is to boil it with a chunk of ginger. Make ginger milk, and then you can drink it. Otherwise, you should never drink milk.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. Oh, he was very anti-milk of all kinds. Yeah.
Oh, that's
Yeah.
guess he's not from northern China. I'm assuming he's from the south
I assume so, because yeah,
because
he
the
was.
northern Asians love their milk, their
Mhm.
cheese, their dairy products. So if you said that to a North Asian, I'm like, mm.
Yeah, it's funny because like he was always anti-milk, 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 and then we actually went to
Southern.
China. Every little convenience store had milk this, milk that, and I'm just like, wait, I thought he said no Chinese drinks milk. Must just be your your tribe, I guess.
Your region of this. Yeah, exactly.
Right. Yeah. Aloha, everyone coming in. I see Chris is here. Hello, Elemental Cartomancy. And Ginger says, "Stop throwing me in your tea."
Funny enough, I was seeing the comments. I saw Ginger Fate hair. I was like, oh, that's so funny.
Duh, ginger's good for everything, says Gerald. Oh my god. Yes, Ginger, I will throw you in all my drinks.
How is everyone, by the way, since there's people here?
Yeah.
Like, how has everyone been doing? It's because I noticed that there's been some kind of like a. Did you notice that you know how the energy level of the community, and I say tarot community, but really you see it in society as well. But you know we're part of the
Mhm.
society, so you know it goes to hand in hand, but it kind of goes up and down, right? And
Right.
now I kind of feel like it's low. Like
Oh, definitely.
everyone's energy feels so low and I don't want to say hopeless, right? But like it's getting there. People are there's
No, I've talked to many people and everyone's feeling the same of just like
like
almost
everyone feels like they're like walking underwater or something, you know?
yeah, there's definitely a lethargy to people.
Lethargy. There you go. It is exactly that. We're feeling very lethargic.
Right. I know I am, but I have reasons. I'm still a
Yeah.
little jet lagged and I got COVID on top of it. So, does anyone have any more questions for Belle while we got her here for the Spirit Keepers Tarot? Anything specific card you want a little more insight into or anything like that?
Or tarot in general,
Or
anything. Or
tarot?
life.
It's not often we get Belle here just as an open book. Clementa says, I think the energy's been low for a couple of weeks. I'm a teacher, and yeah, it's just blah. Yep.
Yeah, it's very, I wonder, well, I think it's going to continue for a little longer. I'm afraid, I think we're at the midpoint. It's going to continue going down further.
Yeah. I have a feeling that, like, at least till the end of August.
Yeah.
So Gerald says, my SKT study group has about 8 weeks left. We study, discuss 3 cards every week. I love
That's so
that.
cool.
So Gerald, I have a question for you. Which cards has caused the most turmoil in the group as far as like people really loving it and people not feeling it? That'd be interesting to know.
Ooh, juice and tea. I love it.
Naomi says, "Hi, Naomi. I fell out with tarot for a while, but slowly getting my passion back. And that's okay. I mean, I've had that too, where it's like I don't even pick up a deck for years. And then suddenly I'm back into it, which is great.
Yeah, I mean, that happened. In fact, that happened to me before Holistic Tarot was even published. I was really into the tarot in my junior high and high school years. College, I did it more as a sorority sister for very, non-spiritual reasons. And then I fell out of tarot for a long time. And then it wasn't until I was in a moment of, spiritual quandary myself that then I got back into the tarot. And you hear this, like everybody has a version of this story where they go up and down and have these different varying relationships with the tarot. I think that's actually super normal.
It totally is. I mean, I've had it myself where like I was really into the tarot in my 20s, and then about mid-20s I kind of fell out of it. It's not like I got rid of any of my decks or didn't pull cards. It was very rare for me to pull cards. And then I think it lasted probably about 5 or 10 years where it just was like, it was such on the back burner, I didn't even think about it half the time. And then something turned around and I was back into it again. So
yeah, funny enough, that's why I'm working on my Atea deck right now. I kind of felt like if you're using the RWS system for an extended period of time, I think you fall into this weird funk because it's too mainstream. I don't know what the word is, but I just felt like I was in a weird funk. And so a way for me to rediscover my creativity was to do something that was outside the normal system of interpretations that I use. And the Atea was absolutely that. It's really fun to work with. Like, for example, the magician, or the equivalent to the magician card, means illness. The hermit card is really bad news. Anytime the hermit comes up, it kind of creates misfortune and chaos in any cards that neighbors it. And so all of these things that you're just really not used to in terms of the reading, it helps kind of get you out of the dogma that you find yourself kind of pigeonholed in if you use one system all of the time for an extended period. So doing that really helps. You notice other people are having the same quandary. Suddenly people who were never thoth are into the thoth, right? You've seen that, right? Some people are over Marseille, are suddenly rediscovering a passion for the Marseille system. So I think everybody's feeling it and trying to get out of the RWS funk in their own way.
Right. Oh, I have a question from M.A. the Gray. If this wasn't asked yet, wondering how much Bell feels the SKT chords align with STD meaning? And how much intentionally diverge? Thank you. STD, I'm not sure I know what that means.
Like RW, I don't know what's STD. I'm trying to think of the acronym for STD. I'm like, what is it?
I'm just thinking of the bad one.
That was the first one I thought of. I was like, no.
Oh, she says standard.
Oh, standard.
Of course.
Stupid. We are so dumb. I'm like trying to think of a 3-word phrase. Oh God, like our brains.
Well, at least we're on the same wavelength.
In terms of standard, you mean the RWS, right? So
I'm assuming, yeah.
It diverged a lot, and also I made sure that it was ambiguous enough that if you wanted to read a standard RWS or a thoth into it, you could. But I find that one of the really interesting things as an artist, a creator, is that because there's so much variance in how people approach the court cards, it means when you sit down as a creator, you can kind of go in your own direction. So I decided to take that to the extreme. This is my deck. I can do whatever I want. That kind of a feeling. So I'm like, I'm really going to take that to the next level and do what I want with the deck. And so with the court cards, in terms of how I read the cards, and I made sure that not everyone needs to read it this way. How I read it is they're absolutely spirit contacts. And so anytime a court card comes up, the way I read it is a little bit more literal as spirit. It's a spirit presence. And so and it can be something as simple as an ancestral spirit that's in the room with me. It can be a passerby spirit. And because of the way the deck has been worked with, or what with the craft that's gone into the deck, it acts as kind of a beacon or nexus that can draw the attention of any nearby spirits, but then also has a ward around it, so the spirits cannot actually cause any impact on. It's just a way of so it's like seeing through a looking glass, or being able to see through a window the two worlds. And so if a spirit comes by, they can see you, you can see or feel the presence of the spirit, but there's a wall between, like a clear glass wall between the two of you, so there can be no interference in that sense, right? They can't interfere with your life, but they can feel the presence, and you can still communicate through a plexiglass. And so that's how I read the court cards. It's always as some kind of a spirit contact, but not everybody has to do it that way.
I actually really appreciate the way you set up the courts and how the messengers like are bringing a message, but you're not ready for it yet. And then once you're ready, you pull another card. That was like, oh my God, yes, I got to do that with all my decks.
So to answer Emma the Gray's question, it definitely diverges from standard meanings, because that's obviously not standard court card.
Right. Chris says, doing okay, Benebell. The heat is testing my Scottish ginger skin. Yeah, it's hotter in England than it is in Hawaii.
Oh, you see, that's actually one of the great things I love about the Bay Area. Where I live, the weather is always beautiful. True, we don't have seasons, so we don't get 4 seasons. It's kind of the same every single month, but it's a very good same. So we're warm here. We're not too hot. We're not too cold.
Gerald says, that is something I appreciate about Book of Maps, the inclusion of different systems. It has increased my curiosity and appreciation for and in other systems.
I'm so glad.
Very cool. Yeah, people say we don't have seasons in Hawaii, but we do. They're just not as like defined.
Right.
Right.
Yeah, no. To be fair, the Bay Area, California has seasons too. It's just that if you're coming from New England, so people from the East Coast know, if you're coming from the East Coast, then for sure California feels like we have no season.
I can see that. Having grown up in Santa Cruz myself. Gotta represent. So I was really close to you. I should have reached out.
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh my God, our trip was so packed full of stuff though. Like, I don't think we had a free day.
James likes to regulate our schedule when we travel as well, anytime we go abroad. And he's the same way with how he schedules everything. It's to the minute, like he knows exactly when to be on the platform so that the subway comes. And so we really never have any free moments. It's pretty crazy. Yeah. But then you get to see a lot. So if you travel you really do see everything in that city and eat everything in that city. So it's really cool.
That was Belize for us, because we were there for like 6 days total. The first day we were just kind of like getting settled, and then the next 5 days were nothing but adventures. So our first day there, we did zip lining and cave tubing.
Oh, wow.
We were on the inner tube. It was weird because I thought we would be on inner tubes and just floating, but it was like all the inner tubes were tied together, and there was a guide like pulling us along.
So you were like actually swimming, or whatever you call it, like movement. There was movement to the inner. Oh, that's really cool.
We were just sitting on inner tubes. They're like, just don't do anything. We do all the work. I'm like, wow. Okay. And then the next day we snorkeled at the Belizean. It's the Great Belizean Barrier Reef. It's like the second biggest reef in the world, and it's the most pristine.
Oh, beautiful.
Then on Wednesday we went to a Mayan ruin that was very amazing. And Thursday we did the Monkey River tour, so we got to do a little river tour, do a little hike in the jungle. And literally, like, we get off the boat, and right there in the tree, right where we got off the boat, it was like a whole family of howler monkeys.
That's very cool.
And then our last day there, we did the ATM cave, the Uktun Tunal McNall cave, which it's a straight up Indiana Jones adventure. I mean, you have to swim at the opening of the cave, and then the rest of the way you're like in water, either up to your ankles or up to your chest most of the time, and you're like shimmying across boulders and like trying to fit your head through a crack where there's like a slice that's gonna slice your neck. And yeah, it was crazy. Yeah, and then once you finally go far in, you have to like shimmy up this cliff face where you're supposed to take your shoes off, and then there's this huge cathedral-like room that's like this one of the biggest caves I've ever seen. And we had to walk around in our socks, and we're seeing Mayan artifacts in situ. They haven't been moved. They haven't been excavated. So everything's exactly where it's been for the last 1,000 years.
Wow.
Yeah, including the human sacrifices, whose bones have kind of merged with the floor.
Caves were associated with the underworld, right? Like entranceways to the underworld. That might be a really great place to self-reflect as you're journeying through those areas.
Definitely, because I had to think about the fact that, where we were coming in is considered the exit, because that's where the water is coming out. And there was one of those holes in the ceiling and that was where they came down. And they had these huge jars full of food that they then like lugged into the cavern and up the cliff face to this special space where first they started with food sacrifices, and then they started doing animal sacrifices, and then they finally went to the human sacrifices. And it was because they were dealing with drought, famine, and war, and they thought that the gods had abandoned them. So they were going into the caves because that's their underworlds where all creation came from, and that's where the gods live. And so they were going down there. And interesting thing was our guide kept making us wait till all the other like groups went by, and then had us turn off our lights.
Oh, nice.
So literally there in the dark, and he would flip on, like he had this special little flashlight that had all these different colors. So he'd flash on the red but pointed down, so it's hitting the water. Mm-hmm. So you see the reflection up on the roof of the like red water. Yeah. And he's like, this is as close as we can get to seeing how they saw it.
Wow.
And so he showed us a lot of amazing sights. In fact, there were several structures in the cave that they think the Mayans had slightly augmented. So when the light hit, it created the shadow of one of their gods.
Oh, very cool. That must have been a really rewarding experience.
It was definitely it was amazing. We were in that cave for about 3 hours.
Very cool.
Yeah. Hour and a half in, hour and a half back out. And then, of course, on the way out, he made us do different ways. So there was one section where it was like a group of us. We're in this tiny little corridor that's full of water, like up to here. And you're just like, you have to go sideways, otherwise you won't fit. And you're just kind of like inching yourself along before you get to this 90-degree angle, another gap in the wall where it's like, it's even harder. And yeah, it was. And then when you're done with that, you have to shimmy down the underground waterfall. Like you're holding onto the top, and you gotta like let yourself drop so you feel the stuff under your feet, and you let go. Yeah, it was experience of a lifetime.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Shall we get to some of the questions in the comments?
Yes. Oh, it just jumped. Let me scroll back up. So, that one we just did. Churro says something I appreciate about the book of maps: inclusion of different systems. Aha. Carla says, what are your thoughts on 8 and 11 in the Thoth?
Oh, the Thoth, the lust and art. No, art is temperance.
Right. It's adjustment, I think.
Adjustment, right. Adjustment and the Thoth. Well, it follows, I think he was following the Marseille. And so the way he did it was that he believed that, it was Waite who changed it because he wanted the the zodiac signs to go in order. And so by doing that, you have 7 is Cancer, and then 8 becomes Leo, and then you continue. And so that's the reason they did the switch, is because the Golden Dawn felt like if you switch the 8 and the 11, then the zodiac sign correspondences actually go in the order from Aries to Pisces. But I think the way Crowley did it, it was more because of the Kabbalah. So he emphasized the Kabbalah more in the majors, whereas I think the astrological emphasis was more something that you found in what Waite did with his deck. What are my thoughts on it? I really love his idea of Babylon in Lust. I really like how he explores that concept of it as strength. It goes more with the Revelation, actually, because he's taking a lot from the book of Revelation. I think it's just a different system, right? Like it depends on it depends on which system speaks to you more. Do you work more with RWS, which does have stronger Catholic ties, or do you work more with Thelemic ties in Crowley's deck? I don't know if I answered your question.
So he says that he has a question about sigils and Churro, but I'm not seeing it, Brian. So if you can retype it. Yeah, I'm not seeing it at all. Gerald says, Belle, how do you structure your Churro study journals? By suit, card? I'm thinking about having a separate journal for majors and one for each suit, then organized within each journal.
You can do it that way. So it depends on how you, like, do you prefer numerology? Do you go through it through the vantage point of numerology, which is what I like to do, or do you go through it the vantage point of elements? If it's elements, fire, water, air, and earth, then you would separate out the journal by suit, right? So all of the 8 through 10 in every single suit would be one dedicated space. I like to go through it from the vantage point of numerology. So I have, in terms of the majors, I always conceptualize it as the 3 septenaries, the first, second, and third septenary. And then I do ace through 3. I also do the court cards are all together. And then I do 4s through 10s. And for each one, the fire, water, air, and earth are always kind of grouped together in every single number, because I see the 4 suits as 4 facets of the key theme that the numerology or the theosophical number correspondence represents. But that's sort of my pathway into understanding the tarot architecture. Other people's pathway into understanding tarot architecture is as the 4 elements separately, and then the numbers 1 through 10 are 10 facets of each of those suits, right? Each of those elementals. So it really depends on how you approach it.
Let's see. Oh, Julie's here. Hi, Julie.
Hi, Julie.
Yeah, I'm still not seeing your question, Brian. Yeah, Clementa says, yeah, some of this court card use in SKT has definitely spilled over into my use of other decks.
And I hope that makes sense. Like, for example, pages as the classical messengers, right? And so they come bearing a message. When a page comes up, they're almost like the predecessor, announcing that a more important message or a more important messenger, the person who's sending the message is coming through. That's already baked into the original standard meaning of the page. And I just kind of take it to the next level with how I wanted to express that concept of the messenger.
And Gerald says, oh, that's great. I hadn't thought to group by numerology. I see that as an aspect of understanding the structure. Thank you. Well, hey, Kristen Luis.
But I think everybody has their own vantage point. So I think for me, because I straddle Eastern and Western, for me to think very narrowly in just fire, water, air, and earth, the 4 Western alchemical elements, it doesn't always work for me in a universal capacity. But then numbers, because it's math at the end of the day, using numerology and a Luoshu square, which kind of you see the magic square using the numbers is found in both Eastern and Western occultism. And that seems to be a really interesting, unique common denominator that unites Eastern occultism and Western occultism. So for me particular, because I straddle 2 cultures, using numerology as the entrance point point and pathway makes more sense. People who are 100% Western occultism are going to use the 4 elements, just like how you see people who are 100% Eastern occultism work with the 5 changing phases of the wuxing.
My son's here. Hi. What are you doing? You know you're not supposed to be near me without a mask, right? He's still testing negative somehow.
Oh.
I'm still not seeing Brian's question, but I can guesstimate. He said it was about sigils and tarot. I'm looking, but I do not see the original question. Sorry, Brian.
Well, I think of every tarot card as a sigil, but it really goes back to first and foremost, how do you define a sigil? It's very important to make sure everyone's on the same page first. I think everybody has different conceptions of what a sigil is. If people have a more narrow definition or very precise definition of what is and is not a sigil, then if you don't follow particular methodologies for crafting the sigil, they would say that's not a sigil, right? And then Western concepts of the sigil versus the food talisman sigil in Eastern esotericism are very different. For me, I have an extremely loose and broad liberal perspective of sigil. For example, I think of books as sigils because of the intention that even an author not knowingly puts into what goes into writing a full book and getting it published. The number of people, the intention setting, the united common intention setting that goes into producing a book kind of turns it into a sigil. And if you don't have the intention of craft, maybe it's not as strong. It's not as much of an amplifier as if you intentionally put in witchcraft into a sigil. But there's still energy emanating from a book. And so in terms of anything that is committed to writing, that's any form of ideogram or that represents an ideogram, that represents an idea. When you take an idea that's intangible and concretize it into something tangible, for me, that is on some level a form of sigil. It might be different levels of power of a sigil because of how much intention you put into it, but it's a sigil nonetheless. So yeah, for me, tarot, all tarot decks are forms of sigils. Yeah, so food talismans is actually a very common way of concluding divination in the East. So if you go fortune telling, if you go get your fortune read by a fortune teller in Southern Taiwan or Southern China, whatever happens at the end of it, they'll almost always invariably recommend as the prescription some form of sigil or food talisman to help with the areas in your life that are lacking, or some kind of a gemstone, or it doesn't just have to be a sigil. Sigil is the most popular form of remedy for issues that come up during the divinatory reading. But yeah, some form of prescriptive craft is always recommended after a reading. And so for me, if a reading is negative or I don't love the implications of a reading, I will always craft some form of food talisman or do some kind of craft. And even if you don't believe in craft, it's a way to kind of help program your own mind to be more proactive and more active in terms of taking ownership over your life path so that you do more and you add more of your personal power to changing the outcome. So even if you don't believe in witchcraft, I think it's something very powerful to engage in. Or if you get a reading from somebody and it's a terrible reading, like you hate the reading or it just does not sit well with you, doing some form of active magic to counteract or neutralize the terrible reading that you got is highly recommended. I think I've lost sound with you, Jonathan. I don't have audio coming from you anymore. But there you go. You're back. Antoinette's question. For some decks, I do the Tabula Mundi deck by M.M. Moline. I have a journal just for the Tabula Mundi. I was working for the Marielle. This is like over a decade ago now. But like when I was not a decade, I don't think the deck has been out for a decade. But like when it first came out, because I remember she was, Marie White was featured in all of these magazines. So when it was really popular at the height, I kind of jumped on that bandwagon and I loved the Marielle. So when I was working with the Marielle quite exclusively for a particular phase, I had a journal dedicated to the Marielle Tarot. Most other decks, I don't have one. When I was learning the Thoth deck, when I was learning the RWS deck way back in the day, then yes, I had separate journals just for those particular systems. Right now, I have a separate journal just for the Atea.
Okay. And April would like to know, what sun sign are you?
I'm a Libra sun.
Libra sun. Sorry about the muting. I was trying to talk to my son.
Oh, no worries.
Yeah.
Is he okay? Or he's
yeah,
just check on you?
He's desperate to play with somebody because we've been keeping him isolated, and he's like, he doesn't understand. I mean, he understands, but he doesn't want to understand. He just wants to be able to go play with his friends.
The pandemic has been really hard on children. I don't think nobody has even been fully exploring and talking about, to the extent that we should be talking about, that the impact the last 2 years have had on small kids.
Definitely. I mean, it started with like the last semester of kindergarten for him. Mm-hmm. And now he's going into 3rd grade. So
those are extremely formative years.
Mm-hmm. I'm just so thankful that we live in the neighborhood we do live in, because during the pandemic, we just kind of like, the neighbors hung out with the neighbors, and that was it.
Oh, perfect.
So he had friends to play with.
That's good.
Now he is not allowed to go play with those friends because we brought something home with us.
Got it. Makes sense.
April would also like to know, how many decks do you have?
How many decks do I have? I have a lot. At least 1,000 minimum.
Wow. Yeah.
But it's also because, I mean, to kind of put it into perspective, I write a lot of deck reviews. I've been writing and publishing on the tarot and oracle decks for so long that I get sent a lot. So it's not like I purchased thousands of tarot decks.
Right.
It's a very unique position where you get sent a lot of decks. And so because I get sent a lot of decks, they pile up. Think about how many decks are published every single year. Right. Think about that. A lot of them come to me for reviews and postings and things like that. So it's different, I think. I hope.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I recently got hired at paganpages.org to write reviews, so I totally understand. I have a bag with 2 books and a couple decks that I got to review, and I'm like, the Tarot of Houseplants?
Yeah, like if I wasn't so immersed in the tarot world, like the tarot publishing world, if I wasn't into the world and community of specifically tarot deck creators and reviewers, me myself, in terms of a personal practice, I probably would never have more than 5 or 10 decks.
Right.
So like in terms of how I am as a reader, even now with the number of decks I have, I read with up maybe maximum 5 different decks, and then the others I'll rotate around just to see what's out there. And that's more almost a professional interest in the tarot. Right. It's not a spiritual interest in the tarot in terms of actual relationships with the tarot. I have 5 decks, 10 maybe tops.
Mm-hmm. This is not a question so much of a statement. Carla says, thank you for the time you put into SKT. It's phenomenal. I love the standalone magic talismans in the deck also.
Oh, thank you so much. I mean, that means a lot to me to hear, because it makes you feel seen. Like you put so much work into something and you're like, I'm just going to put everything and leave it all in there. And sometimes you fear that people don't see it or recognize what you've done to it. So thank you, Carla. It makes me feel seen.
Tony says, now that you've created this version of the SKT, do you have any other improvements or additions you want to create?
No, this is it. The SKT Revelation is the last edition of the SKT, but there will be more print runs. And print runs might have really minor, insignificant changes. Like a big one will be the card back design. because of the way production is done. I had some issues with the production of the card back design of this version. So you live and you learn. So then the next print run, I know, oh, I can't be that precise with how I want the borders on a card back design. I have to be more generic. So the card back design will change. Typos will be fixed. I'll fix the typos. That's about it. But no, the Revelation is the last edition. There'll just be different print runs with really, really minor insignificant changes.
And Tony follows up with the same vein. What is your most used deck now?
Well, right now it's this one. In fact, it's always on my desk, so I'm always reading with this deck. Yeah.
It's a given, right?
I'm a little biased.
I can tell you that educators are aware of the issues that arise for young people and students, but we don't know what to do about it exactly, especially the social issues. Yeah, and my son is such an extrovert. Like he's an extrovert's extrovert.
Oh.
And me and my husband are both pretty much introverts, so we're like, what do we do with it?
Where did you come from?
And he cannot stand being alone. He cannot stand playing by himself. He always has to have a friend. Yeah.
Aww.
Ginger says that she loves the colors in this version.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, that was a surprise to me too. That was a really positive fluke. So the colors, I did do the colors, but then the saturation, many different print runs. At first, the saturation wasn't coming out right, and so I had to keep tweaking it. And then I learned that you have to overshoot. So if you have to make it lighter than you want. If you send them image files at the saturation level that you want exactly, it comes out too dark. So whatever you want the cards to look, you have to go lighter. And so I had to keep on kind of, overcorrecting by going lighter. And then in my mind, I unintentionally went too light, but then it kind of came out cool. And so I was like, oh, it came out lighter than I expected because you have to overshoot the lightness. But then I kind of like that ethereal vibe that came out. It being a little too light.
Sacred Health says, will you re-release or reprint the Book of Maps? It's a phenomenal undertaking and true classic work that will be studied for years to come.
Yeah, I mean, it's always going to be available on Lulu for anyone who purchases the deck. I'm actually working on revisions to, because there's typos in there because I didn't hire an editor. All of it, all 800 pages was done by me. Every aspect of it, from writing it to formatting, everything was me.
Wow.
And it was done in a fairly short period of time, like a couple of months. So now I have to go back and make sure that it's edited and make some corrections to it. But yeah, it'll always be available.
April says, I want the Vitruvian, but have the Revelations. And Gerald says, Belle, I wish I get a copy of the Book of Maps for the Vitruvian. I was gifted a copy and feel a strong connection to it.
Yeah, you can. I mean, you can get the PDF of the Vitruvian Book of Maps. Just email me or email James. He's the one who checks the emails, not me. But just email us, and I think he'll give you the next steps on how to get that.
Yeah, so should not be a problem.
Yeah, I leave that kind of perpetually out there. It might not be well advertised. So admittedly, it's hard to figure out what's available and what's not if you go onto my website because it's a hot mess and I haven't been keeping up to date. Like some of it was there's some pages that are like, I just, the forthcoming book, The Tao of Craft, so you can tell that it's not very up to date. Some of it is like, oh, my latest publication, Holistic Tarot, it just came out fresh. Go to Barnes & Noble to get it. So I have to update my website. But if you ever want to know anything, email. We can, email James at abeldelivers@gmail.com. If you email me, I don't always respond because I'm terrible at responding, but he's very good.
Gerald says, thank you.
Yeah, no worries. Thank you for your interest.
And April says, I appreciate your writing style. I can see that Libra attorney making your case and citing your statutes.
Thank you. But also, I think for the Book of Maps, or when you're exploring different cultures, I had no choice. I think you have to. You have to cite your sources. You have to make it clear where it's coming from. In fact, I don't think I did as good of a job citing the sources from like footnote by footnote for every single sentence as I would have if it was traditionally published. So I just finished an I Ching book that's coming out through North Atlantic Books, and that has like over 500 citations, like the endnotes, the way you see in Holistic Tarot and the Tao of Craft. So when a book gets traditionally published, I do go through the extra effort of doing that in the Chicago Manual of Style. For the Book of Maps, I got a little lazy and I don't have that. I just have that end bibliography references section.
Right. Tony says, do you recognize how important your knowledge and books for study are to the tarot community?
Oh, hi, Antoinette. Well, I think I bring my perspective to the tarot community, and so I think the tarot community is very free flowing. It tends to be more intuitive, creative, psychic. And so I like to have that more analytical, rational based, research intensive, academic and dry approach that I bring to tarot. So some people love it, some people hate it, and it just is what it is. But I contribute that very narrow, small scale aspect to the tarot community. And yeah, it's a contribution. Some people love it and it doesn't work for others.
M.A. the Gray says, lazy is the last thing I would call Book of Maps.
It was a little lazy though. Like some of it I could have done better in terms of being more precise with citations. I should have. But that's more of a research part. Like if you want that type of a book, you need to have kept really crazy notes while you're writing. And I unfortunately, I didn't do that because I was drawing while I was just doing too many things at the same time. So I didn't keep
You were juggling.
I was juggling. So I didn't keep the copious citation by citation notes I should have.
Yeah, Tony says, your mind blows my brain away.
Oh.
Gerald says the cultural diversity is more engaging than some cultural awareness classes I've taken.
I'm so glad. And I think, so for me, that was one of the objectives. One of the things I was thinking about was like, how do you inspire cultural appreciation? And not just say it. I think if you just say it, how show, don't tell, right? So I really thought about showing instead of telling. How do you convey and communicate that through the platform of the tarot? So that was really what I wanted to do. And the Book of Maps at the end of the day is more of a social studies book than anything else. It's hoping to inspire you to broaden your knowledge and appreciation for different cultures and different civilizations and histories.
Definitely. Well, and as someone who was a history anthropology double major in college, even when I only graduated with a degree in anthropology, I really appreciate all the knowledge in here. Because it touched on things that I had like scraped the surface of, but you went deeper. So I appreciate that for sure.
It was one of the things that, for example, just seeing how, so we want to make clear that every culture is distinct and unique, but to see the universal common denominators across different esoteric systems is so interesting. For example, how many different cultures that had no interaction with each other in antiquity all conceptualized the universe as three-tiered, having this upper realm, the human realm, a lower realm of some kind, and then taking that concept of three tiers and applying it all across the board, 3 tiers of health, 3 tiers of everything. And seeing how every culture did that is interesting. Every culture has some form of speaking in tongues as a way to communicate with deity. And why, how, like what? Isn't that so interesting? Right. All forms of shamanism, if you look at the elements of shamanism, using shamanism as a loan word, it's so interesting how we all have very similar concepts of how to induce an altered state of consciousness. And so going to that level of universality, I think helps you to actually appreciate the diversity of cultures. It's kind of this, this reversal where if you see them as the same as you, then you can start to appreciate their differences in a way that's really positive and familiar, rather than seeing diversity as foreign. And so I was hoping to do that. Don't see diversity as foreign or othered, but to see diversity as a different facet of your inner self.
Right. I like to think of it as the funhouse mirror that you're looking in.
Right, exactly.
Clementia says, yes, it's the common denominators. Your book makes things hang together in a way that makes so much sense to me.
I'm so glad. Thank you.
Cheryl says, show, tell, and reference the bibliography. The bibliography is amazing, I gotta say. I know you said you didn't like, it's not the same level, but it's still like more than I've seen in most books. Like the fact that you break it into regions too is pretty impressive.
And they kind of mirror the structure of fire, water, air, and earth. You have sort of, you can see sort of the different continents, but also kind of has that interesting echo of the four elements and the structure of the tarot as well.
I love that. Yeah, so bibliography is broken into African nation states, Mesopotamia, Levant, Europe, Greco-Roman influence, and the Occident.
Although I did mention that that's hard because Greco-Roman influences really went all over the world, thanks to imperialism, if we want to get negative. But like really, you see Greco-Roman influence as far east as Japan. I was going to Shinto shrines and monasteries there where you had statues from Greek mythology. And you also see a lot of sort of merging and syncretism between Hinduism and Buddhism and the Greco-Roman mythology. So you really see it all over the place. So it's hard to, like, the categories, I made sure to sort of disclaim that the categories are very loosey-goosey. And so don't take it too literally because of the way globalization has made everything kind of syncretized.
Yeah, right. Asia, Indus Valley, and Oceania. And Paleoamerica, the Andes, and Mesoamerica. Yeah. Then general. Pretty amazing. Let's see. Tony would like to know, where does Virgo sit in your birth chart? This is clearly a Virgo's dream.
It's Virgo. I think it's in my 8th house, and I believe my sun is actually right on the cusp of Virgo and Libra. So I do have a lot of strong Virgo influences in my sun because of that cusp.
And I'm a Virgo sun here with a Libra moon. April says, thank you so much for your outpouring. You have brought your unique perspective of tarot forward with real panache.
Oh, thank you.
And Gerald says, Belle, in case no one has said this clearly, thank you for sharing your passion with the world. I appreciate it more than words can express. And I agree.
Yeah. Libra and me, I love to share everything.
There's Tony saying, yep, there it is. Definitely. Thank you so much for this, Belle. This has been amazing, and I look forward to getting to know your deck even more as the years progress, because it's definitely it's in my top 10 for sure, if not my top 5.
I'm so glad.
Yeah. So if anyone has any more questions, we should round it up because we are almost 15 minutes past the hour. So I know Belle has some other things to do today, and I wouldn't mind going and taking a nap. And I wouldn't mind going and taking a nap.
Actually, I have to make a beef stew today. So
that's
roast beef or something to do with beef, because we have a big chunk of beef I have to resolve. So that's going to be what I'm doing today.
That's your task for the day.
That's my task.
Wouldn't you be a Virgo in true sidereal?
Yes, that's true. Yeah, absolutely.
I don't know. I think that would make me
some people prefer the sidereal system. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Tony says, thank you. I love watching your playlist. I echo Gerald's sentiment. Thank you for being you.
Aw, thank you for liking who I am.
Yes, we're getting lots of thank yous. So, Mary met, says April.
Aw.
Oh, okay. I am supposed to be doing another live on Tuesday, but I think I may postpone it. just
to
because I haven't
heal.
reached out to the deck creator. It's a deck creator of the Churro Disassembled, and
Oh.
yeah, that's a very cool deck. But like I said, I'm only on day 1 technically, since yesterday was day 0.
Mm-hmm.
So I think I should give myself a little bit more space. I figured this would be not such a big deal because it's just Q&A. But
Well, I hope you do feel better and take it easy. Yeah, I think sort of staying when you do interviews or you do sort of these lives, it's expending a lot of energy, which you should be using to redirect inward for healing. So instead of letting it all go out, you should be redirect. Be selfish. Selfish is
I'm gonna
good.
be selfish from now on.
Selfish is very good. Yeah.
I had already we had scheduled this like months ago, and I just like I can't back out the last second.
Oh, I would have. I would have been totally okay with that.
I know, but I felt well enough that I could power through, basically.
Okay.
So drink some ginger tea, says Churro.
That's my go-to. Ginger tea is my solution for pretty much everything.
Right, ginger tea is. Oh, you have an upset tummy? Ginger tea.
Yeah.
Oh, you have a cold. Let's make you some ginger tea with some lemongrass.
Exactly.
So thank you, Val, and thank you everyone for being here.
Thank you, everyone.
The rest of your weekend, and I will see you all on the flip side.